Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It's been a very busy last couple of days for Mario Cristobal and this Miami Hurricanes program. Now, what's been at the forefront is what's going on the recruiting trail. Miami hosted a monster recruiting weekend, got a commitment late Saturday night from Joel Irvin. A lot of our attention's been on the recruiting trail the last 48 hours. What kind of got lost in the shuffle is Miami had a scrimmage on Saturday, and what I think so important to note about this scrimmage is it takes me back to 12 months ago when we heard Cam Ward was absolutely tearing it up in the scrimmage for Miami. And the reason I mentioned that is this is kind of the time period in spring practice when we start getting these live opportunities, the bullets start getting a little bit more real in practice. This is when we really figure out what this team's about and who your difference makers are going to be in the 2025 year. I mean, you go back to last year, we knew Cam Ward was going to be good. But when we started hearing what was going on in these scrimmages, our expectations went from, hey, this offense and Cam Ward should be good to it could be great in 2025. And that's what we got. Now, it's one thing to stand out early in spring practice. It's another thing to stand out when the bullets get real. And you're starting to hear some players continue to stand out during spring practice. And I want to go over just kind of some emerging storylines and talk about some guys that we are really now expecting to contribute and be impact guys for Miami in 2025. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, to the Miami fans, appreciate you guys. Y'all been extremely dialed in as we've talked about spring practice, as we've talked about the happenings on the recruiting trail. There's not a lot of fan bases that are engaged in the months of March, in the months of April and February. Y'all have been. It means the world. You guys know I've had a blast talking this program. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And much more importantly, please let it fly in the comment section, because as we go through some of the scrimmage buzz, you might say, we're going to continue to update the conversation in terms of, hey, what are the positions we like and what are the positions that we think Miami might need to address in the spring transfer portal window. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. Biggest storyline continues to be, now you look at it and say, to me, there were two really intriguing storylines heading into spring practice. One was the new defensive staff and the new personnel on defense that's coming in. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. The second storyline was, what's this wide receiver room going to be? Nobody questioned the talent level of this wide receiver room. Mario Cristobal's done a really good job injecting blue chip talent into this room, but it's a really young room. It's filled with true freshmen. It's filled with year two guys. There's just not that many wide receivers in this room that have proven production at the college football level. And so it was largely a question mark as like, hey, where are these wide receivers at going into 2025? Every time you open up the spring practice notes, these young wide receivers are those guys. And it sounds like they're going to be legit difference makers for Miami in 2025. Now, I want to start with the year two wide receiver, JoJo Trader, who I don't think it's crazy to say he's the wide receiver one of this offense going into 2025. Every single time. And what I love about JoJo Trader is he's just a multi-dimensional wide receiver that can bring so many different skill sets to this room. He's a guy that can create separation in his route trees, not only vertically, but also in that short intermediate range as well. He's a guy that's electric after the catch. He's not a one-trick pony at the wide receiver position, which is what you're looking for in your wide receiver one of the offense. Number two is these true freshmen are going to play. And I think the biggest question mark was, all right, we heard them flashing early for Miami. Can they be consistent during spring practice so that we can trust them to get on the football field in 2025? They've been consistent. Every time you read the spring practice notes, it's one or two of these guys are kind of putting it together, if not all three of them. Now, what intrigues me the most here is these three early enrollee true freshmen sound like they're all going to play for Miami in 2025. But what's even more intriguing than that is all three of these wide receivers bring a different skill set to this room. Malachi Tony is the ideal replacement for a guy like Xavier Restrepo. Really twitchy kid, really smooth mover, knows how to create separation, and I would argue that brings a little bit more juice after the catch than a guy like Xavier Restrepo. The ceiling is astronomically high for a guy like Malachi Tony, and it sounds like he's going to play early. And this is a really important kind of wide receiver for Carson Beck, because we all know Carson Beck loved going to Lab and Conkey in that 2023 year out of the slot. Malachi Tony's probably going to be that guy for Carson Beck back in 2025. Joshua Moore is kind of replacing that Isaiah Horton skill set. 6'4", 200 plus pounds, absolutely insane body control and ball skills. And you've seen some of the clips of him making some catches that make your jaw drop. He's a guy that can work vertically down the field and thrive in those contested catch situations. And then how about Dalen Upshaw? We haven't talked a lot about Dalen Upshaw, and I was kind of like, we heard some buzz, but I wasn't necessarily convinced that he was going to be a year one guy. He's bringing a ton of juice to Miami vertically down the field. And so you have your slot separator, Malachi Tony. You have your big boundary X wide receiver in Joshua Moore, who can go up maybe red zone situations and go make plays. You got Dalen Upshaw working vertically down the field. All three of these wide receivers sound like they're going to play. And all three of these wide receivers sound like they're going to provide different kind of skill sets to this room. Ray Joseph, you're hearing some decent things about him as well. Really interesting battle between him and Malachi Tony. And then I can whenever we talk about pass catchers, you can't forget to talk about the tight end position. There's just a lot of college football programs that they don't have a difference maker at tight end. They might have a solid tight end, but you don't want to kind of scheme up your passing attack to get the tight end involved. Elijah Lofton's different. I think he can be one of the best tight ends, not only in the ACC, but in the country. So when you're talking about, do we have enough at the pass catcher position? Yeah, you'll start with the wide receiver spot. Don't forget about Elijah Lofton, because I think he's going to be a stud for Miami in 2025. And you're hearing all the right things from Elijah Lofton. As it pertains to, does Miami need a transfer portal wide receiver? I'm still in the camp. And I know some fans disagree, and I understand why you disagree, because what we're hearing from these wide receivers, you ain't as nervous about these wide receivers as you were a month ago. I still wouldn't mind another proven commodity, experienced wide receiver, because at the end of the day, it's still three early enrollee guys who are going to be true freshmen. JoJo Trader going into year 2. Ray Joseph going into year 3, but not a ton of proven production from him either. So to me, I love the young talent. Wouldn't mind just one more proving commodity in the room. But hey, if you're a Miami Hurricane fan, I think we're just fine. We're hearing them step up. I think that was the thought process for Mario Cristobal. Is let's see what we have with these wide receivers before we go out and spend a ton of resources on one. We are getting our answer, essentially. Now, Miami is looking much better than we thought in the pass catch room than we expected a month ago. Quarterback play has been inconsistent without Carson Beck. Now, this is not a storyline for 2025. If Miami goes out, wins the ACC, and is a dangerous team in the college football playoffs, it's Carson Beck at quarterback. More of a who's quarterback to, what's the quarterback room of the future look like? But it's probably worth noting that I'm not selling my stock on a guy like Luke Nickel. This is a guy that should be a senior in high school and still kind of getting his feet wet at the college football landscape. Really big fan of Darian Coleman coming into the 2026 class as well. It may be something to kind of put in the back pocket, and maybe something to say, hey, these wide receivers might even look better than they are right now once Carson Beck gets back healthy. These wide receivers are standing out with quarterback play that sounds to be quite inconsistent during spring practice. Run game's legit. As much as we just talked 8 minutes about the pass catchers, that I think that the engine of this offense in 2025 is going to be this rushing attack. The offensive line I know is good. I don't think anybody has a question mark about that. It's more the question, like, how good can they be? I think there's a chance it's a top 5 unit in the country. Then you couple that with our running back duo in Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle. That sounds to be one of the best in the country as well. Jordan Lyle is the name that I would watch for. And it has nothing to do with me not liking Mark Fletcher. I've loved Mark Fletcher since he came out of high school and loved what we've seen from a healthy Mark Fletcher during his time at Miami. Jordan Lyle, to me, you want to be, so if you're going to focus on running the football more in 2025, you want to be explosive doing so. Jordan Lyle can be that guy that I'll take a 10-yard run and go make it 40 to the house. That's the juice that Jordan Lyle has. And it sounds like he's changed his body a little bit more physicality going into year 2. I'm fired up for Jordan Lyle going into the 2025 season with this kind of offensive line. I do think that the engine of this offense is going to be running the football. Going to the defensive side of the football, the biggest thing for me is I continue to grow optimistic about this defensive line, because what you're hearing, even coming out of the scrimmage, but kind of throughout the duration of spring practice, is this defensive line is winning a lot of reps. Look, we know the offensive line is really good. This might be one of the better offensive lines this defensive line will see all year. They seem to see them in practice. To hear that the defensive line is not only holding their own, but winning in a lot of circumstances, tells me that this defensive line has the chance to be great. We know it's going to be a good unit. I think the question is, how good can it be? Can it be one of those defensive lines that smothers opponents? It's hard to run the football against them, and then you can't block them up in the pass game. That's what we're looking for. The first storyline to me is Ruben Bain. And I know it's not the flashiest talking point because Ruben Bain's been with the program the last 2 years. It sounds like we're going to see the best version of Ruben Bain year 3 in 2025. That's saying something, because you go back to his freshman year, he's a game wrecker. Dealt with some injuries last year, has lost a little bit of weight, trying to add a little bit more juice as a pass rusher going into 2025. But what if you get Ruben Bain as a top 5 edge rusher in the country, which I think is very realistic to say. That's huge for this Miami Hurricanes defense. Armando Blunt, you're hearing all the right things about this kid. Justin Scott, you're hearing all the right things about him. Dante Simpson continues to be the biggest storyline for me. This was a guy that, if you would have asked me, hey, pick an early enrollee freshman on the defensive side of the football that you think is going to play a lot, Dante Simpson would have been at the bottom of the list for me. And it sounds like he's going to be a rotational player for Miami in the 2025 year. Now, all of a sudden, you're feeling good about the depth of the interior defensive line as well. The best way to help a secondary out, which is a big question mark for Miami, is have an elite pass rush. Have a pass rush that is very difficult for offensive lines to block up. If you have a good pass rush, you can protect the secondary. Not to say this secondary needs protection, because I think the secondary is going to be pretty dang good. But having a not just good, but elite pass rush can cover up for a lot of other different things that might still need some time. It's a really big storyline for Miami, and I think you're hearing all the right things. A linebacker position still seems to be a work in progress, and this might be a position where you might see Miami go out and add one more name. You like what you have with Wesley Bissainthe. I think you like what you have with Jalen Alderman, but he's probably a guy that you maybe ideally it doesn't start and is more of a rotational guy. I think the ideal scenario is, a guy like Popo or a guy like Bobby Pruitt, maybe a guy like Kellen Wiley as a true freshman can come in and really push for some opportunities, because I think those guys have some high ceilings. But it sounds like you're probably looking for one more linebacker that has played significant football that you trust in that room. And then the last storyline is Xavier Lucas is him. And what I mean by that is kind of similar to how we talked about Cam Ward coming out or committing to Miami out of the transfer portal. It's like, we knew Cam Ward was going to be good. It's like, how good can he be? To me, what you hear from Xavier Lucas is he's coming and he's by far the best cornerback in this room, which is saying something, because we know OJ Frederick's really, really good. It sounds like he's a legit cornerback, one that has, first round NFL draft upside. That's when you have a cornerback that you can put out on an island and go trust, you can get so much more creative with what you want to do on defense. Last year you didn't have a single cornerback like that. Maybe OJ Frederick kind of played like that towards the end of the year, but he was still a true freshman that was still getting his feet wet. When you have a cornerback that you trust out there on the boundary, You can start rolling safeties into the box. You can start sending safeties in some blitz packages. You don't have to protect the cornerback because you know he can handle himself on an island. When you and I'm a Michigan fan, so when we had like a healthy Will Johnson, you saw this where Michigan all of a sudden could be so much more creative on defense because we knew that Will Johnson could, kind of erase whatever wide receiver he was head up on. Is that Xavier Lucas going into 2025? It sounds like it is. And Corey Heatherman is going to cook then in terms of, hey, I don't have a liability at corner. Like last year we had liabilities. We had to do everything we could to protect our cornerbacks last year. Now it's like we trust our cornerbacks a lot. Now we can get really aggressive with what we want to do on defense because we trust what we have in the cornerback room. What you're hearing from Xavier Lucas is that's kind of what you're getting, which I think should excite Miami fans. That'll do it for kind of like the scrimmage halfway through spring practice notes that we have. You're hearing a lot of the right things. There's a few positions that maybe you want to try to shore up. I think safety position, one more safety to go along with Zachariah Poyser would make sense. Maybe one more proven commodity in the linebacker room. Maybe one more wide receiver. The thing I'll say is there's not glaring holes. Miami does not need to enter that spring transfer portal window in desperation mode that we need a player like this or it's going to be a problem. Now it's just kind of about putting the cherries on top and making sure this roster is as deep as you need and as talented as you need it, which is it's a good spot to be in going into the spring transfer portal window because there's a lot of teams that we've talked about that got big time question marks that they're going to have to go out and be desperate in the spring transfer portal window. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.